This screencast is an introduction to Reginald Rose's play, 12 Angry Men, which is going to be taught to a Year 9 class. That's a class roughly of 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, starting in the summer term. Before we go even any further, as you're reading this, it's probably good just to have a look at the two posters on this page. Both of them relate to the play, one on the left to the film, the other to the play itself. And just have a look straight away and begin to see, as you look at these, what you're going to be able to say about what this play is about. In the first one, there's a silhouette of presumably a knife, a group of men looking very well dressed in clothing of the time. In the second, a table with pads and a pencil, possibly a knife lying on the table, chairs all around it. Before we go any further, just let yourself consider what you think this play might be about. Why is the number 12 significant, for example? Why are the men angry? And then we'll move on. At your time, just press pause while you have a think, and then move on in the screencast. The play was a very successful play on Broadway in New York and turned into a film. The screenplay for the film, which is the version we will work with next term, was written by Reginald Rose. He adapted his own play for the cinema, and it was filmed in 1957. The link below gives you a link to a website where you can find out more details about the play and the film, and I suggest again that you pause now and go and find the website, look it up, and read a bit about the background to the film and the way the film was received by the critics. The play has many ideas within it, but in order to really appreciate this play, you are going to have to consider, and this is what I will help you do over the next 2 or 3 slides, a range of contexts for the play. I've chosen 3 or 4 here. There will be more and they will come up during the teaching, but these will give you an introduction for you to think about. Again, on many of the pages there is a link to the web, to one of the many sites where you can find out more details, and again, I suggest you do. For those of you who study history, I suggest very strongly that you speak to your history teachers about the period that this play is set, what was happening in the USA during that time, and get as wide a contextual understanding as you possibly can of the play. One of the things that's interesting in terms of the context here is that 1957, when the play was made, the Cold War was a very definite entity, if you like, in society. This idea of the USA and the Soviet Union being at war without any shots being fired. And it was shown very clearly to society at large by what was known as the space race. You can click for more information. But I've included here a picture from the New York Times newspaper, where the headline itself not only is giving information, but is beginning to tie into this idea of competition and threat that I'd like you to think about, in the sense of how it might affect everyday lives and the attitudes of people living at that time. It seems that the newspaper headline is more interested in the fact that the satellite has crossed over the United States 4 times than it is about the fact that, for the first time at this point, a satellite had been fired into space and was orbiting the Earth. More things to consider here, perhaps the clash of the times. I've included a photograph to the left of 4 gentlemen of the day against the backdrop of New York, standing there in all its high-rise glory. And on the right-hand side, a face that many of you will know, or a figure rather that many of you will know, and if you don't, I'm sure your parents might well be able to tell you who he is. And I've asked you some questions to consider underneath. How might the guys on the left feel about the man on the right? What would he represent as far as they're concerned, and how might their attitudes towards him be coloured by an impression that they've received possibly through the media or through the way people are talking about him and men of his type as they would see it. You might want to consider that before you move on. The USA has always been a country of immigrants. So it was founded essentially by immigrants arriving in the USA and has always been a country that has welcomed immigration as it has spread further west through time. By the 1950s, the primary immigrants into the USA, probably, and certainly the East Coast, were from Puerto Rico. And there's a small map here, not to scale, to show you where this immigration is coming from. I'd like you just to think again before you move on. Why might it be that the Puerto Ricans moved to the USA after World War II in the first place? How do you think the people living in the big cities of the USA, particularly perhaps those of lower economic classes who themselves might be unemployed, how do you think they responded to this influx of immigration? And before you move on, think again as to whether you can see any parallels to today in these ideas. One of the reasons we read literature is for the light it can shed on our own times. And this play, as many others, is as important and valid today in the ideas that one receives from it as it was when it was written in the 1950s. Again, you might want to just have a look at the web link there before you move on to give you more information about the immigration at the heart of the story of the play. The USA is often called the land of the free. What do you understand that to mean? Quite seriously, sit and think for a moment. What does the land of the free actually mean? Should it imply a welcome for all immigrants into the country? And whether it does or whether it doesn't, the last point here under the Statue of Liberty herself is that in the Constitution of the USA, everybody is enshrined the right to trial by an impartial jury. What do you know about juries? This might be a good time just to do a little bit of thinking, asking questions of your parents, grandparents, looking things up. Why is it so important that juries are impartial? What happens to society when juries are prejudiced? Think about that before you move on. Sadly, I think, although you're not taking any exams this year or major exams this year, we're reading this play partly to broaden your mind and to give you a real sense of enrichment in the learning that you're undertaking, but also, of course, as preparation for the exams that you will have to take. And on this page, I've highlighted the 4 assessment objectives for any examination that you will be coming across. Just so we understand them quickly. A1, a close knowledge and understanding of prose, poetry and drama texts and their context. This is why the previous slides have been so important. You need to understand the context of the writing. The next AO looks at the use of characterization, theme, plot and setting. How are characters created? What themes are explored? What is the setting of the play? Setting is a concept we will have to talk about at some length, but it involves not only the actual physical location, but things like the time, the wider location, the city, the country, everything of that sort of nature. AO3 is understanding the way that writers use language, the way they structure their works, and the way that in this case form, in this case the dramatic form, is used to create effects. Lastly, the idea that we have to look at the way that, as it says, a focused, sensitive, lively and informed personal engagement with literary text. This is you coming up with your thoughts, not simply what you have been told. Right. And it's important that you take this to heart, because you're going to be doing obviously quite a lot of work as this goes on, but there's going to be three major pieces of work as we move through the term. The first piece is going to be creative, and it's going to in some way ask you to work with design or costume to show the character that you are dressing or you are presenting in this way. All the work that you provide here will be annotated with quotations, and there'll be a brief explanation of your work attached. In many ways, this is not dissimilar to the work you've been doing last term on the short film unit, and it's perhaps an extension of the same ideas. We need you to be able to write and to be able to use your imagination when writing, and one of the things we will ask you to do here is a piece of what's called transformational writing. In other words, this might be a diary kept by one of the jurors at the time and then referred back to. It might be a letter written by one of the characters in the play during the trial, explaining and exploring the ideas that happened during the play and the ideas that have come up to that character whilst the play has taken place. It might be the director writing an article about why he's made certain decisions. It could be a review, it could be a missing scene, it could be a variety of pieces of work of this kind. What it won't be is a drama, hence transformational writing. And finally, you will, at the end of the sequence, write an exam-style essay based on the IGCSE models. These essays are nearly all either about character or about theme, and they usually ask us to explore maybe the way that the theme of prejudice is explored during the course of the play, or, for example, to write about how one character in particular is important to the play. I'm not going to tell you what that question will be, but since the whole of Year 9 is working on drama, what will happen is that the same essay will be written across the range of texts studied, and so in the end, the whole of Year 9 will be writing essentially the same question, which means that we will get an idea of how you stand across the year group, and we can relate classes one to another. Finally, just so you understand how it's going to work this term, the play has 12, maybe 13 in some scenes, roles. What we're intending to do is to alternate you between being one of the jurors in the play, i.e. being one of the characters that speaks, and being part of the press corps, reporting on events. And this will get explained in more detail at the beginning of term. But the idea is that you will, for a week at a time, either be one of the readers or one of those making notes and preparing to present, if you like, the news at the beginning of sessions to help us to recap on what has gone before. In both cases, you will obviously need to listen hard to make notes, both as we go along, but also as homework, and you will be being set homework regularly. And it might be that the homework that you're being set will be simply to ask you to reflect on what has been taking place in the play that you have read during the week. We may get involved in a chat room on the VLE to discuss ideas that have emerged through the week. What will be happening is you're learning how to analyse the techniques of playwriting, how to recognise the effects of the choices made by the playwrights themselves. And you will find this, I hope, an exciting and a stimulating term where we should have a lot of fun and cover a lot of ground. Thank you for listening.